and welcome to Let's Build, Fix Computers, whatever. I don't even know what my show's called anymore. Anyway, I've got here a GTX 1060 5GB. Now, anyone who watches or has watched that one Linus Tech Tips video about the really weird Chinese 1060 might have a faintest idea of what I'm talking about here. This is a 1060 5GB. Now, you might be saying, but there is no 5GB version. But there is. As I say, Linus Tech Tips did a video about these where when you look on eBay, you can find these allegedly 1060s for really cheap, like between 40 and 80 pounds, that kind of money, like just suspiciously cheap. And everyone's just like, is it real? What is it? You know, and Linus Tech Tips, they bought one of these. I'm not sure exactly which one they bought, but they bought one of these. They did a test and they discovered that it was actually genuinely a 1060 5GB version that was made for the Asian domestic market. It was specifically aimed toward cyber cafes in the Asian market where they wanted really cheap gaming graphics cards, and that it was genuinely a real thing. So in this instance, my mate Hugh decided to take a punt at a couple of cheap ones of these on eBay and see what happened. So he bought two of these on eBay for how much were they?
£52 something each.
For about 50 quid each, yeah. So for about 50 quid each, we bought two of these. And after a couple of weeks, they showed up in the post from, overnight Japan parts, whatever. So yeah, they showed up and we plugged them in and we had a lot of trouble getting them working, basically. So firstly, let me plug this one in for you and I'll show you just what we've got and what our discoveries were. We were originally recording a quote-unquote a discovery video for these. However, we had such a bad time trying to get the things into a usable state that it just wasn't really viable. However, now we've discovered everything there is, well, not everything there is to know about these, but a great deal of interesting information. We thought we'd share what we'd found. So, first of all, we couldn't get one to work in Windows 10. The drivers just wouldn't take. You install the driver and it would install and it would say, yes, there's an NVIDIA graphics card there, but it would constantly throw up driver errors. What was it, a code 13 we were getting?
Code 43. Basically, the error message along with that was just a case of the device has reported an error.
Yeah. It was one of those, it was really unhelpful, wasn't it? And we were just like, who knows what that is?
Yeah. Very much a case of this might be working. This might be actually just hardware faulty.
Yeah.
The driver might just go, this is the incorrect region. Yeah, we didn't have a particular avenue to investigate initially.
And for quite a long time, we just assumed that it was quite possible that we just simply had two faulty cards, which is possible because, that'll happen when you buy stuff from China. They'll just sell you something that doesn't work. You roll the dice when you buy stuff direct from China, unfortunately. It's just the nature of the beast. But yeah, so after a lot of faffing about, we spoke to the sellers and they were just like, you have to try this driver, which was a Windows 7 driver. So we're like, okay, well, let's try it in Windows 7 then. So here's a test rig running Windows 7. And we actually successfully installed the driver. And we thought, it works. They work, And if we bring up, if we go into Device Manager, I might just open up Device Manager for a sec.
For those playing along at home who wanted to know what the driver version was, it was 391.35 for Windows 8 and Windows 7 only, as opposed to the version of that also includes Windows 10. So, a very specific driver version to potentially make it work.
Super strange. But once we installed that, as you can see, we literally have a GeForce GTX 1060 5GB listed in Device Manager. So once we got that far, Hugh very enthusiastically started up Folding at Home to see if the CUDA cores were working. And Folding at Home said, you don't have any CUDA cores. And we were like, uh-oh, I don't think we're out the woods yet. So then we started doing some more digging and we ran up Firmark to see if the thing was at least performing as we would expect a 1060 to perform. And let me just show you what we got there. Cool. So So what we did then is, Firmark 1024 by 768 anti-annealing AA turned off. GPU stress test. Let's start that up. Do so at your own risk. All right, and we've got 24, 25 frames a second. I don't think so. It's working, and again, Firmark says it's a 1065 gigabyte PCIe SSD 2, but that performance, that's not what we should be seeing from a 1060. You guys are seeing a slightly choppy display because of the screen capture. However, you can see the frame rate displayed on screen. It's the mid-20s basically. And yeah, that's just it. It's not behaving as it should. We can also see that the core is running at 900. It's not boosting or anything like that.
Yeah, you would expect the base clock for a 1060 5GB to be 1506 megahertz, boosting to somewhere around 1709. So by the fact that it's 900, either, boost is completely broken, or something else is completely broken.
Or perhaps this isn't really a 1060. So, then Hugh said, what's in GPU Z? Sorry, GPU Z.
It's a Z. You're English.
Agreed.
Good God.
So, Hugh, do you want to take us through this bit? Because you know more about this bit than I do.
Yeah, sure. So, in GPU Z, you will get various bits of information about the card that it will read actually from the device and not the information that is presented to it by the BIOS version and so on. So as you will see initially, straight off, first of all, it knows that it is a fake card.
Oh yeah, it literally
because
says
it literally
name.
says fake there and gives you a giant arrow, a giant warning symbol. But the thing that I saw first was the fact that the release date for this apparent GPU was March 2011, when the 1065 gigabyte came out in 2017. So that was obviously the first thing. Then the other thing was that the manufacturing process was 40 nanometer, when the 10 series were all 28 nanometer or smaller. So various things didn't stack up. And based off the fact that this is in GPU-Z self-identifying as a GF116, we can then search that, see what cards it was used in. And it was used in various rebranded cards at the very low end. So it started its life as a 400 series, something like the 4550, then was rebadged to a 5450, rebadged again to a 6350.
Yeah, NVIDIA reused this core a lot, didn't
they? But it was all very bottom end, and it's 5 generations older than what it was being sold as and labelled as.
Cool. So at this point, because we had 2 cards, we were like, cool, let's open one up and see what's underneath the bonnet then. So that all being said, let's actually take a look at the card to see, we've seen what it says in software, let's look at the card and see what we've actually got hardware-wise. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the card itself. So the first thing you'll notice is it's got the shittest cooler on it that you can imagine. That's not really surprising given the fact that it's a cheap Chinese card. We weren't really blown away by that. Blown away.
No.
However, interestingly, the cooler is really bad. It has no thermal management at all. These are literally just 2-pin fans with no speed control on them at all. They just run at full speed all the time. So the card is very noisy, is the first thing to note. And, there's no heat pipes on here or anything like that. The actual card itself, as you can see, it looks fairly unassuming. I mean, this one came with just a bit of Kapton tape over the SLI connector. No idea why. We haven't tried SLIing these. But other than that, it looks fairly unassuming. It looks like a modern graphics card just with a cheap cooler on it. It looks reasonable for that. It's got a 6-pin power connector on it. It doesn't have Molex on it or any of that bollocks. It looks fairly unassuming. So then we took off the cooler of our other one. And here's some more details on the cooler. And as you can see on the bottom, it's literally just a chunk of aluminium and not very much of it at that. So we don't have a lot of thermal mass there. It's a really naff stuff with just some tech screws just drilled into the side kind of thing. This cooler was not really built for anything in particular. They've just put some spacers on the card just to make it mount properly. And there's our 2-pin fan. And on our particular demo card here, that was literally just wedged into the middle of this connector here. You can see where they've actually bent the plastic connector on it. However, incidentally, the other card does have a proper 2-pin on it, but that is 2-pin into a 4-pin space on the PCB. So it's still a bodge. So again, you can see where they've kind of started reconstituting things. And looking at the board, you've got these just weird spaces there. So let's look at the board. And now we can start pointing out some other things. So, first of all, these cards do actually have GDDR5 on them. And the rest of it, it's manufactured. There are some weird bodges like these spaces. The build quality of the card is really sketchy. When you look over here in the VRM section, all of these are on crooked, but fine. There's a hand bodge here. This guy's been hand soldered because it's crooked and it's got flux residue around the edges of it, where it looks like this has possibly been repaired. Perhaps when it was perhaps this failed Q&A in manufacturing, and someone just stuck it on a bench and just hand soldered a new MOSFET or whatever this guy is onto it. And also, we've got just literally a chunk of solder there that I've just snapped off with the tweezers. So the build quality on them is pretty sketchy looking. But the requisite parts are all there. Incidentally as well, we've got, the power management chip is there, but we also noticed that it didn't look like it had any other major power management chip for the auxiliary rails anywhere. Although there is some other local regulation around in certain places that might be relating to that, but who knows? We didn't look that closely into it. But that leads us to the actual core itself. So let's take a closer look at that. And when we take a look at this fella, it is exactly what CPU-Z told us it was, which is a Fermi-based chip. So this is basically an 8-year-old GPU that has somehow found its way onto this board. Whether it's new old stock or a recycled or otherwise scavenged chip from somewhere, who knows? My guess is it's new old stock. But it's somehow made it onto there. It has some weird markings on it. We've actually cleaned this guy up as best as we can, but it still has just some faint scuff marks on the die, which is really strange. I'm not sure why those are there, but again, that implies that it's new old stock rather than actually, being an actual legitimately manufactured GPU. So my guess for this card overall is just simply that I don't think that this is like a really bad repair job or anything like that. I think that at some point a Chinese factory somewhere bought a bunch of cards for making graphics cards and just cobbled together this weird Frankenstein card out of whatever they could get their hands on. And then they've done a very exotic BIOS mod to make it pretend to be a 1060 5GB. It has 5GB of memory on it. However, that chip ain't a 1060. That sound about right? Was that everything?
But also, just interesting, it's got 12 memory modules for 5GB.
Oh yeah.
So that means those modules are either a weird size, or literally two of them are mounted and don't function.
What chips are those?
Speed.
Okay, yeah. Yes. Do they say what capacity it is? Interesting. Yeah, see, not all of these are the same either. That's a T0, that's a T0. That's a T2. That's a T2.
Yeah, because the T2s are the 2.5 gigahertz ones.
Yeah, and that one's a T0. And that one's another T2. So and if we look on the back as well, and then again, I think we're going to find a mixture of T2s and T0s. So it's got mixed memory on it, which again is just literally someone in the factory just dived their hand into a box of chips and just pulled out whatever came to hand. I wonder if these are reject memory chips. So although there's, for example, perhaps, let's say that one of these is supposed to be a 2GB chip, but half of it doesn't work. But 1 gigabyte's worth of it does work, so they're using that 1 gigabyte's worth of it. You know,
no idea, but
that would be interesting. So again, it failed QA, so that it was just sold as a reject chip.
GQ1.
And then they've literally just they've just piled a bunch of it on there, and there is at least 5 gigabytes of working memory on this board. So with this weird mishmash of memory, the information that we saw in GPU-Z actually makes even less sense than it did before. You know, we got the basics information from that now, but now we're actually looking through some of the other things, such as the ROPS, shaders, the memory bandwidth, and so on. Those numbers are making even less sense than they did when we didn't know what was here. So we looked up the spec numbers that we saw on these weird mixed chips, and we found out that what we're seeing from GPU-Z doesn't even match that. So what is it that we're seeing? What should we be seeing from this, and what were we actually getting?
So the expected numbers for a real card using that actual GPU core would be having approximately a memory bandwidth of 38 gigabytes a second. Whereas GPU-Z is reporting something in the 80s.
Yeah,
it's reporting 81. So it's a case of even there, the memory bandwidths don't line up with the real-life product that used the core. So clearly it's a case of there's been some overclocking or a different, because of the change in the BIOS, it's reporting differently
or
something.
They're fudging the numbers somehow.
The numbers are getting fudged even more so than one would particularly expect from, the core that's on there. But yes, so the shader units we would roughly expect to see on a real 1060 5 gigabyte would be 80 TMUs, 40 ROPs, and 10 SMs. As we can see from GPU-Z, we've got 24 ROPs and 12 TMUs. So, yeah, less than half the number we would expect.
Do the ROPs and TMUs line up with what the core should have?
So the ROPs and TMUs also don't actually line up with what the core should have either.
Yeah.
Because what the core should have is 24 TMUs, which it has 24 ROPs, and it should have 16 ROPs, where it has 24. So, yeah. It's a complete mismatch.
It's almost like at some point someone has had the BIOS open in, a quote-unquote BIOS editor, and they've just tapped in what numbers they want it to report itself as having, and they've tapped those numbers in the wrong way round and incorrectly.
Yeah, it's a complete mess.
It's a complete dog's dinner, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a complete mess, but it's just interesting to see that, because looking at the specs for the GeForce GT 545, which was, as far as I'm aware, the higher performance version that this core came in, and even there, it's obviously listing lower specifications than we're getting out of it.
Yeah,
and also it's a case of it's listing lower maximum bandwidths and things like that. But interestingly, lower core clocks. It's listed as a core clock of only 720, whereas this has a core clock of 900. So.
Yeah, I mean,
interestingly, it appears that potentially if you have one of these, it might actually overclock reasonably well by percentage, but the actual performance you'll get out of it will be, awful.
Interesting. So that's just it. So the thing is, I mean, from an objective point of view, initially when we first started messing around with these, and we were trying to make it work in Windows 10 and stuff like that, we thought we had faulty cards. The interesting thing is we don't have a faulty card here at all. We just have a really bonkers Frankenstein card where someone has just bashed in the numbers into the BIOS, almost making it up as they go along, just anything that they think looks vaguely plausible. And the card does actually work. However, obviously Windows 10 is just taking one look at that and going, I don't know what the hell you think this card is, but it ain't a 1060, which is probably why it was giving the generic code of just random error has occurred, because Windows 10 was probably looking at this going, I don't know what the hell this thing is supposed to be, but I can't use this, Whereas Windows 7, obviously not having native support for really anything at all, is more subject to allowing itself to be deceived in this way. So that's really kind of interesting that we came to that conclusion, because initially when we looked at these and we just couldn't get them to work on a driver point, I thought that this video was going to be a bust. I didn't think we were going to get anything useful out of it. It was just going to be a case of you bought a cheap graphics card, it didn't work. Whereas what we've actually found is something that is not usable, and you can probably say, no, this doesn't work because it's not fit for purpose. However, it's a fascinating discovery, and it fascinates me as to the amount of effort that has gone into manufacturing a fake product, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's always the conclusion when people look at cheap Chinese stuff, when when we're watching Big Clive videos and stuff like that, is the effort and almost the ingenuity that went into making a fake product that doesn't work in any useful capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously not specifically having hands-on experience of doing it, but it seems kind of a case of you've put all this effort into making this.
Why didn't you just make a good one?
Yeah, or wouldn't it have been less effort to make a good one?
Yeah.
Using pre-binned parts from manufacturers where they say these bits are guaranteed to work together.
Yeah. If you really want to, again, a lot of the components on this thing, like potentially the chip and the memory chips and stuff like that, are probably reject parts that failed quality assurance in the real factory, because these are Hynix chips. Hynix are a genuine brand. However, they probably failed QA in the Hynix factory, and someone just picked up the bin and walked out the back door. However, and it's so, I can understand using binned part, just parts that were chucked out. But again, why not just use a 1060 chip that got chucked out and then just sell it for, a 10 or 15 pound extra, but a card that actually works? Somehow, in their economy, this is still an economically viable business model.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's bizarre.
Absolutely, and obviously the interesting thing to view from my point of view will be to see what stance eBay takes on it as well.
Yeah.
By the fact that, obviously, if I raise this with them, by the fact that it was sold as one thing and is clearly and demonstrably something else.
Yeah.
Will they view that as...
that's certainly the interesting part, is that, you would be... The eBay dispute is open as parts missold, not actually faulty parts, because it's not a faulty graphics card.
Yeah, absolutely.
It works as intended.
Yeah, it does 2D acceleration, it does 3D acceleration.
Yeah.
It does them badly, but that's what you expect from hardware that's 7, 8 years old.
That's right, but the crime here is that it's not what it says it is. Interesting. All right, so I hope you guys found that kind of interesting, and let me know if there's anything else you want us to investigate, or if you spot any other cheap parts. Maybe I might be willing to invest some money to find out what it actually is. I don't do a lot of mega deep tech dive videos like this, but I kind of want to get into that. So let me know if you found this interesting, and let me know if you guys have had any experience. Of course, one more thing that we do need to add is, obviously, the big question now is, well, was Linus lying in his video? And the answer to that is no. The chances are, of course, this is just a random graphics card that was purchased off eBay. It's possible that you can buy these that are the legitimate Asian market 1060s, and possibly if you buy it from a more reputable place like AliExpress or somewhere like that, who are a bit more stringent on these things, you might actually get a proper Asian market 1060 5GB. So we're not saying that the card itself is that the product is fake. This particular example of it was a fake. So I think the takeaway from this is that if you watch that Linus Tech Tips video and were like, ooh, cheap 1060, I'm going to buy one of those, be careful. You might not actually get what he got.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a case that because eBay isn't used by China particularly, it's a case that they all use AliExpress and Taobao and equivalent. So it's a case of the stuff that's actually on there is from sellers who don't want to get discredited in their own home market.
Yeah.
So there's more... You're more likely to get a genuine product for a Chinese product off of AliExpress, Taobao, etc. because that's the market they're used to selling in.
Yeah.
And it appears that in the West on eBay, we get the proper reject stuff.
Yeah.
Just because it's a case of they know that a lot of people can't be asked with posting it back and things like that.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm guilty of. When I get duff parts, I have to admit, a lot of the time when I get duff parts that I've ordered in, I very rarely get round to sending stuff back. For me, it's so much faster for me to just buy another one and move on with my life. And I think that's what they gamble on. That plenty of people just can't be bothered to make the effort to actually make the dispute, post it back, claim the money back, and all the rest of it. All right, thank you very much for watching, everyone. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye for now.